Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Jazz Shepherd channel. We talk about jazz and whatever else comes to our mind some days. Today we're going to talk about the year 1957 in our series on the music of each year. We're going to break it down a little differently this time. Let me know if you like it this better, if you like it more random. We're going to do it kind of by label this time around. People might be interested in seeing it grouped together this way. Or maybe you liked it better just the random like the first 2 years were. Let me know. We'll go forward accordingly. But this time we're talking about Prestige and Blue Note, the first part of this series. I got 9 records here from Prestige from 57 and 9 records here from Blue Note from 57. And they both have great art departments at this point. They both share a similar stable of musicians. In fact, guys like Burrell, Coltrane, Donald Byrd, they're cross-referencing. They're on both labels continuously. It's a great year. Jazz is starting to really move forward. Hard bop's really starting to be refined. And for me, Prestige always seems a little bit looser and less honed than what Blue Note has to offer in the hard bop idiom. More of the Blue Note albums at this point are part of the Blue Note sound, as it were. The Bud Powell would be an exception. Jimmy Smith would be kind of an exception. For the most part, those other 7 records are the prototypical Blue Note sound. And when people talk about the Blue Note sound, if you want to pinpoint it, look at the hard bop of 56, 57, 58, into even 59 and 60. That small window is the Blue Note hard bop focused fury of the musicians like Hank Mobley, Sonny Clark, Curtis Fuller, even Rollins, Horace Silver, Art Blakey, Coltrane, and Lee Morgan. At this point, Blakey's actually not on Blue Note in 57. He's on Jubilee, he's on Pacific, he's on a dozen, seriously, on 6 different labels in 57. He comes back to Blue Note, of course, the next year and makes a string of records for the next 10 years that are landmark. And Blakey's definitely a big part of the Blue Note sound. The Jimmy Smith record was the dawning of a new sound of Blue Note, organ jazz. And whereas most organ jazz is very soul jazz and thought of in that kind of a context, Jimmy Smith was a virtuoso in the sense of Charlie Parker. He could play and solo and throw down these long, vicious streams of notes that nobody had ever even envisioned the organ being able to do. He comes into his own in 58. 58 through 60, for me, is Jimmy Smith's greatest years. The records like House Party and The Sermon, he really starts making these incredible records. But in 56 to 57, he has a whole bunch of live material on Blue Note. Like, it's an amazing body of work. And a few studio sessions like this one. Great cover. Sonny Clark, to me, seems to be very much the focus of the Blue Note sound. And there's no other label in the industry in 57 that's as aggressive, as full of tension, full of aggression, full of the anxiety and the end of the repression and the freedom-seeking nature of Blue Note. The emotional context of some of these records is so on the edge of what's happening in jazz that it actually is as powerful as any innovation that happens in the music. The innovation here is as much consciously and spiritually as it is musically, and it's just a focused, united resistance against tyranny that you can feel the young Mobleys, the young Sonny Clarks, the young Lee Morgans expressing vociferously. It's a powerful, potent brew that no one captures like Blue Note. No one really comes close in my mind. And the term hard bop is given this kind of vague definition. And it starts kind of 52, 53 with Miles Walken, with Lucky Thompson, and the Clifford Brown, Max Roach stuff is absolutely the genesis of hard bop in my ears. And a lot of things get kind of bundled into that sound by having the up-tempo, fast-driving, post-bop look. But Blue Note really refines it and hones it to this emotional saber that cuts through the anger, frustration, and tension of life in America as a black male. And that's what Blue Note so well documents. Bud Powell's back on the label at this point. He's had numerous breakdowns, been in institutions, in and out of correctional facilities. Bud Powell's life is one full of tragedy. But he's back at Blue Note, and in spite of his breakdowns, he's still doing some really brilliant, innovative stuff. For me, Sonny Clark is the crux of the Blue Note sound. And when he's at Blue Note, hard bop exists. When he's gone from Blue Note, when he passes away, hard bop kind of passes with him. It feels like he's the ambassador for a lot of these other guys, the leader in a lot of ways. And you'll see he appears on piano on a lot of these sessions. So Clark's a really influential part. Mobley is really starting to come into his own here. He's really starting to develop that tone. You see Sonny Clark on that one as well. This is the great Coltrane Blue Train, his one record on Blue Note, and it's one of the most enlightening, powerful pieces in the Blue Note discography. It's where most Blue Note fans will come on board, is with Blue Train, because we know Miles and we know John. And it's a fantastic record. Lee Morgan's incredible. The entire session is full of fire and vitriol. Fuller's one of the great hard bop trombone players. To me, he's not as dexterous as Jimmy Cleveland or J.J. Johnson, but he's got a real aggression, a real tension, and he's a great foil for the sax players of this era. Rollins is at the vanguard, and it's a trio setting. I'm going to change the drummer on a couple different tracks, but it's really intense. Rollins, I believe he's got the mohawk going at this point, if I recall. I feel like he's being impacted by the Blue Note stable. This roster of young black men was a militant group. It was a fed-up group, a group on the edge, tired of the teetering on the brink of extinction, and they're fighting back. And it leads Rollins to do some of his most brilliant work at Blue Note. He really has an intensity to him that you won't hear on the Milestone Rollins stuff. Even on the Prestige stuff, it's less focused, it feels like. And that's part of the Blue Note rehearsal thing. We pay you guys to rehearse so that when you guys track these songs, there's such a unified vision, politically, socially, spiritually, that you guys are like a garrison, unified, functioning together, and fighting through the resistance and being this unified wake through the darkness of the oppression. Silver, of course, is a big leader in the whole movement. He and Blakey are kind of the two, the Y and the road, and Silver becomes the kind of the middle edge of hard bop, R&B tinged, with lots of softer tones and rhythms, but it's always grooving and spacious. And Blakey becomes the more driving, really full of vitriol side of things. Lee Morgan, of course, is ubiquitous with Blue Note at this point. Great album cover, great record. And I want to break down for you a little special episode, a string of records that Blue Note does here, that I have a few of them showing, that's unrivaled in the history of jazz. Prestige, by the same token, it's more of a rough organization. Bob Weinstock's kind of loose, firing from the hip. He brings guys in. He doesn't put a lot of work on who's going to be on the session. It's going to be more who shows up. There's a piano player. Let's him record. There's more open blues sessions, jam records, blowing sessions, less focused, spiritual and mental unity. And he really comes across. It allows the blues and the natural elements to shine, but it's not the focused fire of Blue Note quite the same. If you listen to the Fuller record here, which is his first, versus Bone and Baritone from the same year, it's quite a different in terms of its edge. Garland, of course, is of the great Miles Quintet. His solo work is always of the highest value. And he's got Coltrane, Donald Byrd, just an all-star lineup. Farmer met Grice. These two are brilliant together. Weinstock didn't have to do a lot of work when he's working with Farmer and Grice. Those guys are going to do it. One of Tommy Flanagan's great solo pieces is Overseas, one of the great album covers in Prestige history. It's a fantastic record. You hear Flanagan's dexterity and how brilliant a player he is. On three trumpets, again, you have Art Farmer, Donald Byrd, Idris Suleiman. It's more of a kind of a blowing session with three trumpet players. Gene Ammons is putting together sessions now at Prestige that are some of the great records of this time. They're very loose, blues-driven. You can drink and eat chicken to these records. They're great records for kind of partying and dancing. And Kenny Burrell, Jackie McLean, Art Farmer, Mal Waldron, Doug Watkins, and Art Taylor. This is another one of those Prestige kind of jam records all day long. It's kind of since been given titleship to Kenny Burrell, but it was never really meant as a Kenny Burrell session. It's an incredible record, incredible group. Frank Foster of the Basie group was in there, along with Donald Byrd, Kenny Burrell, Tommy Flanagan. This is Earthy, another record of that same ilk, kind of Prestige All-Stars. Who's going to show up to get their heroin money? Oh, we got Al Cohn's in the house, Al McCusick, Mal Waldron, Teddy Kotick. It's probably from 2 sessions by looking at that right now. I don't recall, but I'm pretty sure it is. We're actually listening to Earthy. I'm listening to it the last day. It's a great record. And then last of all, Coltrane's first record as a solo artist. 7105 comes out in 1957. And Coltrane is one of the giants of this music. Of course, we all know that. This is his first chance to really put together his own group and for us to hear him in that context. He's given pretty high billing right off the bat here. A major voice in the Miles Davis Quintet, the new tenor saxophone star, John Coltrane, 7105. And it's got Johnny Swan on the trumpet, Sahib Shahib on the baritone sax, Mal Waldron on the piano, Paul Chambers, and Al Heath. And Johnny Swan on the trumpet, I'm guessing that's a nom de plume. Not really their name. And I can't remember who that would be though. I'll have to look that up. Anyway, that wraps up part 1. Let's take a look at what the rest of the New York labels were doing. We'll be right back. Thanks. Pause it. Hi guys, welcome to part 2 here. This is the rest of New York right now. What else happened in New York in 1957? And we're actually going to 56 records, I believe, for 57. In part because there's so much more current material being released by the labels. In 55, Emerson puts out almost 100 records, but most of it is vault stuff from the 40s and early 50s. And all these labels are kind of catching up to speed now. They've got a lot of their backlog out on LP. A lot of what they're putting out now is newer material. We're going to see Riverside really start to hit its stride at this point in 57. And we can see how the music's starting to change. Composition is starting to become more present. These guys all want to write, they all want to arrange, they all want to bring something brilliant to the sound and changing guard of the music. And so there's a lot of different things happening in 57 that's only going to accelerate. And again, the LP is a big part of that. Having this 45-minute format allows us to really delve deeper into concepts, delve deeper into arrangements and compositions, delve deeper into the psychology and personality of the musicians who are playing. All of this informs us on a different basis. All of this accelerates the evolution of the music, accelerates our connection with the artist. We know a musician a whole lot better listening to 45 minutes of a record than we would from hearing a single on the radio. That one song doesn't tell us much. 45 minutes on a record, then you add 2, 3, 4 records over a couple years, we start to get to know artists. They start to want to stretch their boundaries because they've gotten so much more accomplished so much more quickly. So the dawning of the LP era is instrumental, and we saw how it changed things in 56, and that accelerates here in 57. Savoy is kind of coming to the end of the road a little bit. They will continue into the early 60s, but their volume of material being issued early in the 12,000 series, in 55 and 56, with all that backlog, by now in 57 they kind of slowed the backlog down. And they've also kind of are starting to transition away from jazz into more R&B and some gospel, which happens a little bit further down the road. But by 57, the output at Savoy is greatly diminished. Yusef Lateef has joined the fold. And remember, we're talking the 12,000 series. So by 57, this is number 12,103, 12,117. So in 3 years, Savoy's put out 117 records. Most of that's from the 40s and early 50s. But this is current stuff on the edge. Yusef Lateef is actually as forward thinking and as modern in his concepts in 57 as almost anybody in the game. And what Mingus was to 56, in 57, he's bringing this Far Eastern sound, untraditional instruments into the mix, a real world global sound to what he's doing. Being from Detroit, living in New York, the world's at your doorstep, and he's making jazz sound like that National Geographic that we all saw in the waiting room at the doctor's office. Yusef has 5 or 6 records here at Savoy, 57, 58, and 59, before he moves on to Prestige and does some really great stuff there as well. Regent was a label that Savoy bought out, Herman Lubinsky, and Regent kind of keeps its own separate path as artists for its first 10 years, late 40s and the early 50s. But by 57, Regent's pretty much an extension of what's happening at Savoy, and you can really feel a shift in what Regent starts to release. This Curtis Fuller record has a lot of Detroit musicians, Sonny Red, Tommy Flanagan, Louis Hayes, and George Tucker. Jazz, it's magic. It's kind of a weird album cover. Again, Savoy Regent never had the greatest art department, even though I like that album cover. She's kind of pretty, I guess. This is the cool sound of Pepper Adams. These are both really tough records of mine. All of these are, actually. Pepper Adams is a great baritone player, and he doesn't get a lot of records as a leader. This is one of the ones he does at Savoy Regent, 60, 66, 60, 55. And if you look at before 60, 55, Regent's doing a lot of Billy Eckstine stuff from the 40s and 50s. And you go even earlier than that, it's kind of like budget live albums that they're putting out. So to see new, modern, cutting-edge jazz coming out at Savoy in 57, even if it is just a trickle, they're still doing some stuff, and Lubinsky's allowing them to still shine. Bethlehem is also reaching the end of its road. 55, 54, 56 was Bethlehem's shining moment. But in the 57, they got Mingus in the fold. He does a couple pretty landmark records here. Blakey does a couple records here that are of note. This Charlie Rouse, Paul Kinnishare record is outstanding. The Chase, really a really hard bop, hard driving record. One of the most focused, black, unforgiving records that Bethlehem does. Bethlehem's largely a white outfit. The Rouse Kinnishare record is them really taking a chance on some East Coast. It looks like it could be a cover of a Mobb Deep record. You know, it's got a lot more edge to it than most of the Bethlehem fare, just in terms of its blackness. Atlantic is doing great things like Coleman Hawkins meets Milt Jackson. And Milt, of course, is a vibraphonist with the Modern Jazz Quartet. And they're doing kind of chamber stuff that's kind of composed, European sounds being braided into it. When he's on his own, Bill Jackson is one of the great blues players of this era. Just a swinging guy that knows about space and the Count Basie tradition. And Milt's a great player. Ray Charles is, of course, at Atlantic. He's doing R&B stuff on the 8000 series, but in the 1200 series, this is number 1312, he has 4 or 5 really great instrumental jazz records that are really worth collecting. Riverside has now really hit its stride. Watch out for the statue. Coleman Hawkins here, Flies High, is one of Coleman's great records. It's a beautiful session. You really hear his gorgeous tone. Randy Weston now is from the New York School of piano players, and he's got a modern, real strong compositional edge with shades of Monk and Bud Powell and some of the edges of Mingus even in some of his compositions, especially as he moves forward into the 60s. Monk, of course, is still the linchpin of the Riverside sound, and he's doing some fantastic material in 57. And Brilliant Corners comes out at the end of 56, and so it's really also really a part of 57. And then this Jazz Contrast record with Kenny Dorham is a wonderful album on Riverside. Riverside's output's about to increase. 55, 56 was a small output, and they were still kind of doing the Dixieland 10-inch stuff. Riverside slowly is transitioning, and they launch with modern jazz with Monk, but it's a trickle of output. And by 57, it's starting to become a bigger brook, and by 58, Riverside really is about to hit the scene and become the 3rd major triad of the Blue Note Prestige Riverside Triangle. Some smaller independent labels. Roos is doing stuff with Stan Getz. Roos is doing stuff like this with the New Yorkers, with Sonny Stitt. with the great Shadow Wilson, Wendell Marshall, and the great Hank Jones. The Jubilee Label, formed by Herb Abramson, who was working with Atlantic originally, who left to start his own label, Jubilee. He's taking a chance on the young Jackie McLean, and he reissues his first label record, Ad Lib, from the Ad Lib label, and he also has a session of his own here at Jubilee. That's definitely a worth finding record. Oscar Pettiford is at ABC, and ABC was started by a film company, and they're starting to do some great jazz, like this Kenny Dorham record in '56, like the two Oscar Pettiford records in '57. There's a couple of Lucky Thompson records in '56, '57 that show you how jazz is starting to really embrace new things and new sounds, and much more of a black consciousness, a black militancy, a black freedom fighter. The music isn't just the celebratory nature of the swing era, and we're gonna have a good time in spite of our pain. This music starts to become a direct attack against our oppressor and a focused resistance. And you can really feel the tension and the movement of the civil rights era reflected through so much of the music of this time frame. And then for the major labels, Columbia is really starting to hit their stride as well. In '55, Columbia had next to nothing that was hardcore jazz. In '56, they launched the Blakey record, and they signed Miles Davis. He comes up with this great Miles Ahead record that's fantastic. Donald Byrd, Gigi Grice, Jazz Lab, their Jazz Messenger alumni, and this record's a brilliant, modern, truly black record. For a label like Columbia to release something like this, for the whole nation to consume, it was very important steps. And Columbia was years ahead of Capitol and RCA and Decca in terms of their racial ability to cross over. And then this great soundtrack that's recorded in France for the L'Ascenseur pour la Chauffeur, the Liftway to the Gallows, is it? Or it's a French film, and Miles with the great Barney Weiland and Pierre Michelot, they're playing along to the film, and it's a beautiful, lyrical, somber, melancholy soundtrack that's one of Miles' masterpieces in a way. It doesn't feel in any way processed or planned. It feels very organic and honest, and he almost feels kind of exposed and vulnerable. And I think Miles, when he opens up and allows us to peer inside and to see his weakness, is when he's most brilliant. When he's got that ego and that kind of posing going on, there's a lot of shellac, a lot of shine that you have to kind of see through to see his vulnerability on the inside. And we all know Miles was a very fragile young cat. So let me show you what's happening in Chicago, New York next in part 3. Peace. All right, part 3. Now we're going to look at the West Coast and the Chicago scene, and we're going to look at also what Verve was doing, which is really a New York label. They have headquarters on both coasts. They recorded some in LA, they recorded some in New York. So it's hard to define where Verve is really, they're not really a regional label like these other labels are anyway. So let's look at Verve first. Verve really starts to hit their stride here in '57. 55, 56 is the transition from the Clef Norgran era into the Verve era. And he makes this much bigger imprint at Verve, much better distribution, and he's trying to promote the great swing era cats to the country. In 55 and 56, there's all this material coming out from earlier sessions that he wants to reissue on Verve. And if you look by 1957, we're already well into the 8200s. And the series starts at 8,000. So here we are in 57, 8274, 8246, 8222, 8250. Verve has put out 250 records in the 8,000 series alone in 55, 56, 57. That's a glut of material to sort through. And on top of that, they're doing the 4,000 series with Ella Fitzgerald, the 2,000 series, which is kind of more of a poppy vocal series. There's a 5,000 series, which is kind of a poppier schmaltzy series. So the prolific output of Verve and Norman Granz is insane. But by 57, it starts to ebb somewhat on the back catalog, and they start to really make some great new recordings, which they have been doing all along, but it starts to become clear to define what the Verve sound is by 57. And you have this great Sonny Stitt record, Only the Blues. That's one of the highlights of Verve in 57. one of the highlights of Sonny Stitt's career. Roy Eldridge is on this, Oscar Peterson, Herb Ellis, Ray Brown, and Stan Levy. This is just a beautiful, beautiful record. And the blues is what this all really comes down to. Jerry Mulligan and Paul Desmond, a couple West Coast cats. Mulligan is just becoming this really renowned arranger, composer. He's highly in demand. And so everybody from the Black Cats to the White Cats want to work with Mulligan and have a chance to work on those charts. Mulligan was a brilliant guy working with the Kentons and the Woody Hermans. He really was a prolific guy in so many ways. And when we did our white saxophone series, we saw just how much of a preeminent figure Jerry Mulligan really was in this music. His future wasn't somewhere else. He remains and stays a big fixture in jazz for decades, and is one of the great white musicians out there. And his records don't sell for nothing. They go for next to nothing. Part of it's because he sold pretty well, so they're out there to be had. But part of it's people just don't think that he can be that great for some reason. And Mulligan's fantastic. Dizzy Gillespie's doing his big band here. And we also learned doing some of my series over the last 6 months how everybody plays with Dizzy Gillespie if they're black. Dizzy Gillespie, Lee Morgan's on this. Talib Dawood, Mel Balliston, Al Gray, Rod Leavitt, Ernie Henry, Jimmy Powell, Billy Mitchell, Benny Golson, Billy Root, Wynton Kelly, Charlie Person. That's insane. This is an incredible record. It's a bebop big band. So it's a big band with big arrangements, with some incredible bebop-driven soloing that's really on the edge of the music. And this is one of the last times where the big band sound is a current thing. Eckstein and Gillespie represent kind of the last gasps of big band music being on the cutting edge. And big band certainly remains as a nostalgia thing for 30 years in clubs, bars, retirement communities, late night TV shows. The big band doesn't go anywhere. But as far as the big band contributing to the edges of the music, this is one of the last times it really does that. Ben Webster makes his incredible Soulville record. And so even at Verve, you have this kind of modern Gillespie, you have this composed Mulligan, you got the blues of Ben Webster, you got Coleman Hawkins that counters Ben Webster. All this stuff here encompasses the edges, the composition, the blues, the sexy, sensual crying of Webster, the Coleman Hawkins Ben Webster confrontation. It's just an incredible story to tell. RCA makes one of its first real important leaps into the jazz world. And they've been doing schlocky stuff for a long time. Most of their music's going to be white. And they chose a brother here to make him look as white as possible. I thought he was a white guy for a long time. And it wasn't until I did some looking on the internet, I'm like, oh shit, they just made him look white as they could. He's actually a brother. And Russell makes some really forward, modern, he starts to develop the ideas of modality and some of the ideas of Lenny Tristano. He starts bringing that into a larger group ensemble. He's got R. Farmer, Barry Galbraith, Hal McCusick, Bill Evans. It's a great group. And it's some really wonderful, forward-thinking, on the edges. If you're a Mingus fan, if you're a Monk fan, if you like the edges of like Jackie McLean, this is a precursor to almost all of that. So here we see in 57, RCA doing some really forward stuff. It's the first time they really kind of stepped into the fray. Quincy Jones does this great record at the ABC label. He's working in the Chicago scene, working with the Argo guys, working with the Embassy guys. He makes a great string of records for Mercury Embassy. That's some of the most powerful, innovative stuff of that time. Quincy's going to change the face of the music in a lot of ways in the coming decades. So he's an important figure to include here in the mid-50s when he's really starting to help change how jazz sounds and looks. Max Roach plus Ford plays Charlie Parker with Kenny Dorham, Hank Mobley, and Nelson Boyd. Fantastic stuff on the Embassy label. Cannonball Adderley, sophisticated swing. And what's swinging here? The car door or what's holding the car door open? She's got some swing in that trunk, no question about it. Cannonball on these early Embassy records really shows a vivacity and a brilliance of life. He's full of explorative gestures and just really wants to embrace the joyful side of his nature. And he's one of the fun players of this time frame. There's a great picture of him on the back. There's also his brother Nat Adderley, Junior Mance, Jimmy Cobb, and Sam Jones. Outstanding record. People sleep on Cannonball's Embassy records. There's 4 or 5 of them, and they're really, really great. Modern, sophisticated, post-bebop, edges of hard bop. And like I said, no one really does hard bop quite like Blue Note does, but it's definitely post-bop, and it's incredibly up-tempo and full of life. And what makes it not hard bop for me is the bright positivity of Cannonball. Cannonball's a fairly light-spirited man, so his music comes off quite joyful, and I think sometimes that gets held against certain people. Argo also really starts to hit their stride in '57. Johnny Griffin record, the great local Chicago tenor talent. He's one of the fastest fingers in the game. He makes his early record here at Argo 624. And now, conversely to this label, Verve, well, there's been 200 releases in the last 2 years. Argo starts in '56. Here we are in '57 at 624. So they've only got 24 albums so far in a year and a half. Clark Terry, the great St. Louis trumpet player who played with Ellington for years, at 620 makes this great record. It's one of the Daddy-O Presents records, one of the great records that's really hard to come by on Argo. Part of why Argo records are often very expensive like this is it's never been reissued. And so that's a hard record to come by. As is this great Paul Gonsalves record, also never reissued. You'll have a hard time finding this record for under $100. Gonsalves and Terry both are, of course, alumni of the Ellington groups of the 50s, and this is some of their solo work. Outstanding stuff. Now on the West Coast, Sonny Rollins is taking the train out to the West. He's doing what we're listening to right here, way out west. It's with some West Coast players. I believe Shelly Mann's on the drums. There's a Leroy Vinegar on the bass. No, it's Ray Brown. Sorry, Shelly Mann and Sonny Rollins. And this is a light-spirited Rollins. From the ferocity and vivacity of what you hear him doing at the Vanguard, this is Rollins more playing a light, playful tenor. He takes any song and gives it a new context when he plays it. And for those of you who don't want to hear the heavy, political, socially conscious side of the music, Rollins is capable of doing both and does both really well. It's a fun record. This great Art Pepper record here meets the rhythm section. Pepper had been in and out of the music, had a bad heroin habit. He didn't even show up on time for his sessions. From what I understand from my friend Jean-Michel, he hadn't even been playing in 6 months. The session got booked. Miles Davis band was in town. So he brings in Miles' group, Garland Chambers and Philly Joe. And somehow this addiction, in spite of him being messed up and not in the condition to play, it's actually a beautiful record. And that rhythm section is so powerful that Pepper's in a real effervescent state and really shines behind these 3 guys. Harold Land has left Chicago and the Clifford Brown Max Roach group. Clifford Brown's passed away. Max Roach has reconstituted that group. Harold Land decides to move on and go back to the West Coast. And he starts making some great records on the West Coast. The Fox on the Hi-Fi label. This record here on Contemporary. Some great artists on this as well. Rolf Erickson, Carl Perkins, and Leroy Vinegar. Great West Coast jazz. Pacific is doing stuff like this. Chet Baker and Art Pepper. That's a great record. A couple of white cats with a lot of angsty, drug-filled sorrow that really express well together because they kind of are fueled by a similar engine. Gil Evans of Miles Davis fame works with Cannonball Adderley on this great new bottle, old wine. Adderley's on this. I can't remember who else on this, but it's got some big ensemble parts. Johnny Cole's on the trumpet, Chuck Wayne's on the guitar, Gil Evans on the piano, Frank Rehack's on the trombone. So it's a great West Coast record. It's been reissued with a few different covers. Be careful of that. And then Marty Peisch does this great record at Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers is another film studio label. They're not a real great jazz label, Warner Brothers. They start in about 56, 57, doing some stuff with Chico Hamilton, this Marty Peisch record. And they continue into the 70s with some great Herbie Hancock stuff. But they're not a heavy jazz label. But they still do some interesting stuff. And this Marty Peisch record has a great cover. It all makes me want to take a shower. What about you guys? And for the time frame, that was pretty edgy. That's a lot of titty for 1957. And this also has a great group on it. I know I listed the group here somewhere. Conte Condoli, Jack Sheldon, George Roberts, Bob Envelson, Bill Perkins, Art Pepper, Vince DeRosa, Vic Feldman, Russ Freeman, Joe Mondragon, and Mel Lewis. So it's a pretty big ensemble. And again, this is kind of one of the last times you hear a big band done in such a way. Gillespie's doing the bebop, and this is more kind of modern, edges of the avant-garde, Jimmy Joffrey kind of influence. Marty's a great guy who sticks around the scene for a long time. So that wraps up the albums of 1957, from the East Coast to the West Coast. Remember, tell me, do you like to see it by label like this? Or did you prefer it just being kind of the random concoction that the first 2 years were? Let me know. Y'all be safe. Peace. One of the things I want to drive home here on the soundstage is to listen how different and broad jazz can sound. So in 1957, you have this. And this is Miles. Relaxing in Paris. He's not an N-word. And Miles rarely sounds so euphoric, so at peace. He sounds almost happy. He did have a love interest in Paris, so that only sweetens the deal. But to feel the weight over your head disappear for a month while you're in Europe, Miles almost sounds joyous. Conversely, what I want to drive home here is when the Blue Note sound really becomes refined by 57, as per Sonny Clark's direction. Listen to the difference in how this sounds. Listen to the driving aggression. There's nothing relaxed about this. There's nothing casual about this. This is intense. The bass, it's on a mission. The drums are hammering it down. The horn players are all speaking through a megaphone. No more. No, 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 America. No more. It's time for some real effing change. And it's such a tangible, compulsively magnetic sound. If you have empathetic ears and recognize what these guys were going through, it was Moses taking his people out of Egypt, leading them through the wilderness. It's the leadership of these great men through this peaceful resistance right next to Martin Luther King. This is music saying, my soul needs to be free. I cannot take any more bondage. My ancestors suffered for generations. We've suffered and fought in your wars. This, what you've given us, shall no longer be good enough. Do you hear what we're saying, America? And shortly after this, that same verbal message becomes spoken in the Curtis Mayfields and the Sam Cookes and the Marvin Gayes and Stevie Wonders. The same message is spoken in the early days of hip-hop. It's impossible for these men at this point in time to be living in New York and seeing the country in flux and Vietnam on the horizon, and all the tension of the Cold War, for these young black men to be like, enough is enough. Enough is enough. And there's just nothing like what Blue Note does here in 1957. It's a great moment in jazz. Jimmy Smith is a new up-and-coming star. Listen to this. What? What? This ain't soul jazz. That's organ bebop. We never heard no shit like that before. The organ's supposed to kind of plod along like a snowplow. And he put rocket engines on his snowplow. He put rocket engines on that motherfucker. And it's flying. Plowing up a storm. And yet it's full of blues. It's full of the gospel. And there's nothing like Jimmy Smith. All the organ jazz that follows is not to be confused with Jimmy Smith. Soul jazz in that term is not what Jimmy Smith does at Blue Note. From 55 to 1960, his legacy of Blue Note is one of hard driving, modern virtuosity and just a new expression. This, of course, is the great Horace Silver, and this group is outstanding. Hank Mobley, Art Farmer, Teddy Kotick, and Louis Hayes. Louis Hayes is a fiery drummer. Mobley is like the one guy of the Blue Note sound that has a lot more temperatures to him than just hard bop. And he's very dictated by his setting. And I've said that before, so I won't belabor that point. But Mobley can be very much a soft-centered player, but he can also be very fiery and dexterous and militarized by his bandmates. That's basically what it comes down to. He can be sitting there listening to these guys talk during their cigarette break and come back into the studio with the mindset of, man, these guys are fucking right. This is some bullshit. And Mobley won't show up to the studio that way. Mobley's going to show up kind of calm and cool. That's who Mobley is. He's mellow. But you spend enough time looking to some people, some fiery preachers preach, they can get you, they have the gospel. They can get you to put your hand on and be like, oh, yes, can I get an amen? And that's Mobley. Mobley can be moved to fire. But generally he's kind of calm and more serene. And so it's fun hearing Mobley adapt to who he's playing with. This is Prestige, the great overseas record with Tommy Flanagan. Tough record to come by. One of the great album covers of all time. Overseas, get it? Funny. The great Elvin Jones is on drums on this. And I can't remember who's on the bass. Wilbur Little, a name I'm not even that familiar with. But outstanding stuff. Outstanding stuff. And again, this is a really tough record to come by. And it's not one of those records like the Blue Note stuff where it's filled with that tension. It's more kind of a virtuosity driven. Flanagan's a very intricate player. I sometimes question the people when they talk about Giant Steps and Flanagan. Maybe some of that choppy presentation was by design. Of course, they didn't have a lot of rehearsal time either. And Coltrane's Giant Steps compositions were by no means a simple process. If you're looking for some smooth, cool, it doesn't get much smoother and cooler than this. It's been reissued numerous times, and it's better to have this record on some cheap reissue label than not have it. The originals are hard to find at this point. Having the Miles Rhythm section, and Pepper's got a pretty good following on his own at this point. And Pepper's in the top 5 of collectible white jazz cats. You know, once you get past Bill Evans, Chet Baker, our Pepper might be number 3 on the list in terms of what his records can fetch. Mulligan's records never go for big money. Stan Getz has a few things that'll go for pretty good money on the earlier stuff, but his Verve stuff never goes for big money. Pepper's a great player. A guy I've kind of grown into more the last few years. He feels very much like, to me, like Chet Baker, where it's very much the heroin speaking at times. You know, that's the fuel for his engine, is to get high or to get paid so I can get high. But again, this is a masterpiece of the West Coast sound, and you can just hear it's a little bit more breezy, a little bit less funk in them alleyways. When those Blue Note Hardbop cats, it's fire escapes, it's stinky garbage cans in the summer. Like, it's urban, and this is much more laid back. There's room for the convertible to put the top down, and we can go cruising. And the East Coast stuff feels more congested. It feels more intense. It feels more piled upon on top of itself. Like it's a very potent brew. And New York's a part of that process. New York absolutely shades and influences everything it touches. You can't live in New York or be in New York and not feel that intensity of the experience. The overwhelming nature of the density, the height, the sheer capacity for a city to inhabit all walks of life. New York can overwhelm you, and it just gives you this bigger sense of the world and your place within it, and it impacts how you see everything. New York's gonna challenge your horizons. If you have a small set of horizons, you spend some time in New York, and you'll come out of there a broader human being with less of a savings. The city will strip you of its money, but it'll also strip you of your small-mindedness. You can't help but ride the subway and be overwhelmed by the mass of humanity and become comfortable with all of it. There's a reason why liberal social politics exist in urban areas. It's the intermingling of different ideas that makes them become commonplace, comfortable, and normal to me. You pray that way, that's fine. You like to have sex with that, okay. Your skin is okay. You speak this, I don't care what language you speak. Pass me the gyro sauce. The gyro. Pass me the gyro sauce. See what I'm saying? Give me a nice Italian deli, a Jewish bakery on the corner, a Lebanese fair market. Like it just enforces all these different walks of life and so emblazons them upon us to make us bigger, better humans. When we live in isolation with just me and my way of thinking, it really stifles our growth. It stifles our open-mindedness. And it makes us so much more perceptible to fear and hate. And that's the ultimate problem with small-mindedness. The ultimate problem with a lack of vision and understanding of the broadness of the human experience is that when I don't know, I can be taught to hate real easy. I'd be taught to fear real easy. And that's why we have to fight ignorance and small-mindedness and ethnocentrism and nationalism. They're outmoded ways of thinking. I recently got rid of a member who used to battle with me on some of this stuff, and he thought I was offensive in some of my ways of thinking. I'm like, your nationalism, your my country is the only way things are done way, that's offensive to me. Because the reality of this human experience is so much broader than any nation that came into existence 100 years ago, or a religion that was born 2,000 years ago. There's so much more to this life than the narrow doctrines of the few. My Creator insists I worship all of the creation and have patience, tolerance, and empathy for all beings. And my history knowledge has taught me the only group I don't ever trust is the elite. I can't. Because every time in history it's been shown that they're behind the tyranny. They're behind the evil. Their greed has motivated them to turn this group of poor people against me and me against them. So they can pick both of our fucking pockets. I cannot be allowed to be that guy. I don't want to be the guys in history who hated the other group so strongly that they exterminated each other. All at the behest of the elite's manipulations. But my knowledge of Kilimanjaro and the islands of New Zealand and the Philippines and my sons didn't know who Ferdinand Magellan was. I got kind of mad at them, and they swore up and down to me that the school system curriculum never taught them who Magellan was. Mind blown. The national ideology doesn't have room for the broadness of the whole human experience. If I teach you too much about all that human shit, I can't control how you think enough. And I need to be able to control how you think. Because my money is at stake. And that's all they give a fuck about is their money. I'm not going to hate someone because you tell me to. I'm not going to fear someone because you tell me to. I'm not going to believe what you tell me about China. You know why? Because when Rome talked about its enemies, they lied. When England talked about its enemies, she lied. When Russia talked about her enemies, she lied. Ancient Egypt, the Mongols, you name it. When they talked about their enemies, they fucking lied. And so how am I going to be naive enough to think here in the present that the world's superpower is telling me the truth about its enemies? It's competition. Economics is the game. That's what they're playing. There's no religion here. There's no race at stake here. There's no my personal safety at stake. It's the controlling of the world's resources that China's meddling with the affairs of the reigning power. And now we're being taught to fear and hate them. I can't do it. I'm not saying I trust their ruling elite, but I don't trust anyone's ruling elite. And the more power you have over the globe, the more naval bases and air force bases and army bases you've got positioned around the globe, the less I believe what you fucking tell me. You're a fucking liar. Shut your mouth. Don't speak to me. I will not hate for you. I will not do it. Last record I'm going to show you. This is that Grey Sunny Sit record, by the way. And we heard a little bit of Cat on My Idol there for a second. This is that great George Russell session. And there's some real great playing, some real great edges. Again, there's some composition to it here. Jimmy Joffrey almost, where it's like, the more it feels like a film soundtrack, and the more it takes away from the blues, the more compositional heavy it is. Composition will feel more like a score, almost always. Composition will always tell less of a story in its players than the blues will. And again, I've told you this before, but I want to drive it home one more time. These guys are kind of playing in chorus together. It's creating a color, a mood, a vibe, an atmosphere. It's not necessarily, this is not dissonance. Ellington would dig that. Colors, shades, lavenders, hues. This is what composition does. It's cerebral in its approach. The blues is the guy telling you how he feels. And for me, the blues and composition have a hard time being in harmony together. They have a hard time being in unity, in unison. Composition takes away from the blues and doesn't want you to tell me what you feel as much as it wants you to play what my mind has thought of you playing. So it's being fueled by a different source. And there's room for both. This is great stuff, but it just tells you a bit of a different story. You know, Russell's telling me this feels like it's in a Bond film. It feels like it could be in a lot of, Cary Grant movie. You know, his composition has a different vibe to it. But that's part of what's happening in 57. The avant-garde starting to appear. The edges of the music are starting to come forward. The divergence is starting to happen. The velocity of hard bop is starting to be born and expressed fervently. Blues is still being spoken in all of its genuine glory. So there's this great spreading of the trunk that's starting to really take place in the late 50s. We've moved away from the swing era. We've moved away from the concepts of the bigger groups, and we're into smaller ensembles, composing for smaller groups, creating dissonance even within small groups. So jazz is just blossoming in 57, and you can almost hear the different pathways being created. So it's an exciting time, 57. And I've enjoyed seeing this series myself. And I know this better than I knew the saxophone stuff. I already kind of knew this chronology pretty well. The sax stuff, I was learning stuff every day, you know. But I've had my records sorted by label a long time. So I kind of already knew the chronologies here. But to see it all, even these 56 records, whatever it is, we covered this in this, to see them all and just look at them and get a feel for that 1 year, it's a very enlightening experience. And 57 is a great year in the history of jazz and a great time to be a jazz fan. Jazz Shepherd, I hope you all appreciate the state of the channel. If you dig it, check out Patreon under the Jazz Shepherd. I'll put a link to it. There's a new jazz journal, Shepherd's Journal Volume 2, with some great articles from my friends Adam, Jean-Michel, Wolfgang. It's some great stuff. I review all the great drummer-led sessions of the 50s and 60s on all the great labels, from Philly Joe Jones to Art Blakey to Dave Bailey, all the way to Pete LaRocca and Elvin Jones. It's all the greats. We talk about probably 30 of them. Listen to that dissonance there. Listen to that. Wow. It sounds like a cavalry approaching of three-legged horses. And it's still kind of trotting in that broken meter. Tempo shifts. That's George Russell. And what Ornette's going to do, and Eric Dolphy's going to do, and all that stuff that's going to come, and even the modality of what Coltrane and Miles do in 59. Here we see George Russell in 56, 57 already setting that table, borrowed from the Lenny Tristano school and starting to really change the doors. And all the credit that Miles gets, Coltrane gets, Ornette gets, no one really talks about guys like George Russell. And even Mingus, to me. Mingus was a great progenitor of a lot of the avant-garde. Pithecanthropus erectus in 56 is off the charts different. And 57, this George Russell is one of those edges. And remember, RCA put this out. They made him look like a white guy in order to do it, but they put this out. So that's some pretty forward thinking on the talent department at RCA, a label that up to this point has done nothing but milky, soft, white impressions of jazz. There's very little in the RCA discography before, and there's some good Al Cohn stuff, Zut Sims, I mean, there's some good stuff, but it's usually by white cats, and it usually doesn't have any cutting edge to it, which this absolutely does. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. 1958 is coming next. I'm trying to space the content out a little bit to allow more people to catch up, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people watch on the days when I don't broadcast something. So I'm still navigating this, trying to figure it out. And I'm so in love with doing this that the days I don't make an episode, I'm struggling. I'm like, oh man, I want to talk to my friends. I want to share something about what I'm hearing, thinking, feeling. I'm getting some shit done around the house. That's a good thing. But I just really enjoy and value my time with you guys and getting to share from my heart how I feel and getting stuff off my chest and sharing the insight of my collection. My collection has fueled a lot of my insights and knowledge, and that's what I'm trying to share with people, is the things that my collection's taught me. Be safe, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, share it with your friends, go to Patreon and pledge, check out the new Shepherd's Journal. It's worth your time and money. It's a great magazine with over almost 30 videos in it. So if you're looking for content when I'm not putting as much out, that Jazz Journal is going to give you a lot of stuff you can go through slowly and digest. Only one a month. You can take those 30 videos in over the course of a month. And some of them are short little album reviews. Some of them are in-depth pieces. My friend Adam's piece on Henry Grimes. My friend Wolfgang's piece on Wes Montgomery. Jean-Michel talks about the great French tenor player Guy Lafitte. So there's some great articles in there my friends do. Those are alone worth you checking out. Those guys are all very knowledgeable, all been involved in jazz for lifetimes. They're all personally involved with players and know the scene. I'm honored to have them all aboard. Again, a thank you to you guys. Blessings to everybody. Safe peace.